Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Meredith Sumter, and I am the CEO of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. It's great to have you here at the Council's first learning webinar. So drawing from your feedback, the Council is embarking on a virtual learning series on inclusive capitalism issues and reform topics of interest to you. And I am pleased to be joined today by colleagues from the World Economic Forum, from EY, and from Bank of America for this inaugural session to discuss Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics, which were launched by the Forum's International Business Council in September of 2020. Now, before we get started, I just want to mention that this session will be recorded and only the presentation part of this session will be shared more broadly with fellow council members. The Q&A and discussion portion of today's webinar will be Chatham House rules. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, there will be onward learning sessions at the council, and I encourage you to share with us in the chat box your ideas of topics to consider for onward best practice sharing and learning events that the council will host. And this is information on our next such session, which will be on June 20th, so just later this month, and will feature several of our CEOs and global leaders at the council on how companies and investors can take action for an energy transition that advances both social as well as environmental goals. So the council, we have sent out invitations already. We'll put a link to register in the chat box, and in our follow-up to you following this learning webinar, we will also make sure to include the invitation for the next June 20th event on just energy transition there. Now, turning to the agenda for today, thanks again to Emily Bailey from the World Economic Forum, Mary Klein from EY, and Joe Goodwin from Bank of America for joining us to speak to Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics and how to use them. So, at the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, just a few words about who we are, what we're about, this community that you're part of, and why Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics relates to this community. Our mission really is to harness the private sector to create a more inclusive, sustainable, and trusted economic system. So since our launch in December 2020, with 25 industry-leading CEOs, the Council has grown to more than 260 CEO members who are putting forth more than 550 concrete actions for a more inclusive capitalism. I mean, the work that you all are doing is truly powerful. And we are a global community of CEOs, investors, and organizations that value people and that believe businesses are most successful when the broader societies and economies in which we all operate are stable and prosperous. We also believe in action, the power of leading by our example, and the catalytic effect of both our actions and of markets. So to that, the Council is a big supporter of increased transparency in company actions so that we understand our impact, seeing this as critical to advancing company learnings and progress in inclusive capitalism best practices. So as you know, being members of the Council, our commitments platform is organized by 4 sustainable value creation pillars. That's people, planet, prosperity, and principles of governance. These pillars are actually adopted from the IBC's Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics. And earlier this year, the Council introduced an updated commitments form with suggested measures and simplified value fields to make it easier for our members to record their baseline and target information for their commitments. So with the help of close partners, these suggested measures have been mapped against leading reporting standards, including those of Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics. So these new features allow the Council to share out aggregate progress of Council member actions using common measures across different commitments. And many of those common measures also were inspired or came from Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics and the work that this team has done there. So this feature will allow us to demonstrate the impact that you as a council community are making, including at scale. So we have a unique opportunity today then to learn more about stakeholder capitalism metrics, which really provide a starting point to building alignment across reporting metrics, which at the council we see as improving the comparability of company disclosure at what is truly a dynamic time for companies and investors alike. So at the council, as you know, we encourage all of our member companies who can to disclose using a framework of your choice. You will learn a great deal about your impact by disclosing, as well as about ways that you can strengthen your business and your value creation in doing so. So I'm excited truly for this next hour of sharing and discussion. And we'll next turn to my colleague from the World Economic Forum, Emily Bailey, to discuss with you stakeholder capitalism metrics as a framework to consider for understanding and disclosing your own impact. Emily?
Great. Thank you so much, Meredith, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to share a bit of the background of the work we've undertaken at the World Economic Forum over the last 3 years that we've done in close collaboration with our colleagues here from Bank of America, EY, and the other major accounting and advisory firms to really take on board what we believe to be an actionable toolkit that's helping to drive progress and helping companies to measure and manage their impact and help actually measure their commitments to this concept of stakeholder capitalism. So the World Economic Forum is a global institution for public-private cooperation. We've been in existence for about 52 years now. We really try to bring together multi-stakeholder groups to help solve kind of the big economic and global challenges of our time. So we believe at the forum that good capitalism is stakeholder capitalism, where you really involve all stakeholders and make sure that they are accounted for in all your decisions as a business leader. So really, this effort came onto the forum agenda, as you were saying, Meredith, about 3 years ago. Well, a little more than 3 years ago, when Brian Moynihan, the chair of the Forum's International Business Council, of course, CEO of Bank of America, brought it forward to the agenda. Really to say that everyone, so citizens, whether they be consumers, employees, potential employees, members of broader society, are really putting pressure to global business leaders to help respond to global challenges, to respond to environmental challenges, social challenges, and governance challenges. So we at the forum wanted to do was really to say, is there a way that we can coalesce around kind of a toolkit to drive consensus building, to drive action, to actually help move towards creating better transparency and better consistency as we look to measure what we call the stakeholder capitalism metrics, or the ESG, environmental, social, and governance performance of companies. So we can go to the next slide, please. Really, just to say, I mean, you've probably read a lot about ESG in the news, this commitment to a sustainable future. There's certainly an urgency that is capturing many of the headlines right now, but many of the leaders we work with at the World Economic Forum have been feeling this pressure for quite some time, whether it comes from their investors who are trying to drive their reporting, their transparency, and their year-over-year progress in ratings on their ESG performance, or whether it's their employees or consumers. Many companies we talk to who are working with us on this are really feeling this pressure to retain and attract the most talent. They really need to be transparent in communicating their concrete commitments and year-over-year progress towards their ESG objectives and strategy. We're also feeling as well with the standard setters, with governments and regulators right now, there's a lot happening. We'll get into that later in today's presentation in terms of, we have so many different reporting regimes, so many different frameworks and disclosures and metrics, and how do we really make sense of them? How do we actually create global consensus, global comparability, and global interoperability so we can all understand and digest ESG information, just as we all know how to digest financial information, financial reporting. And then really as well, when we talk about stakeholders, there's a lot of pressure coming from, the broader society. So, working with NGOs, working with academic institutions and others to see how we really help to drive consensus and create better transparency and comparability of ESG reporting information. Go to the next slide, please. So this was really brought forward to the agenda because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different metrics and standards and frameworks out there at the moment. So every company is reporting on a suite of metrics and frameworks that are very important to their stakeholders, but they're not necessarily consistent or comparable. So what we're trying to do is really say, is there a way we can move towards global consensus, global alignment, actually get a lot of convergence to happen in the marketplace? So then we're looking at ESG information as we look at financial information. We have two internationally accepted systems for financial reporting. So our kind of utopian dream when we started this was, is there a way we can approach to have something similar for ESG and non-financial reporting information? So you could clearly see, what companies are doing to address living wage, pay equality, carbon emissions, all these issues that we're hearing about in the press, but it's really hard to conceptually understand and compare the information that's currently being put out by companies as they do their reporting. So go to the next slide, please. So what we really did is Brian brought forward this to the agenda of the Forum's International Business Council, which is a group of about 120 different CEOs from different industries, from different geographies, from different awareness and understanding of the importance of ESG reporting. And what we really wanted to do was say, is there a way we as a global business community or a representative set of a global business community can start to drive some consensus in alignment around what we believe could be a globally aligned effort to move towards a globally aligned system for ESG reporting. So we asked EY, Deloitte, KPMG, and PwC to work closely with us on this because we wanted to make sure that all the outputs of our work could be actionable for companies to take on board, and that the actions could actually be included in official reporting materials like a company sustainability report or annual report. We worked really closely with the firms to develop a set of metrics, which we'll cover off on the next slide, but don't jump there yet, to really say, is there a way we can actually demonstrate that what exists in the market right now, what exists in the marketplace, can actually be the building blocks for a globally aligned solution? And then what we did is once we put out these metrics, we did a 6-month open consultation process where really going back to the forum's genesis, we really consulted with a group of stakeholders. So we consulted with the corporates, the investors, the NGOs, the data providers, the stock exchanges, the academics, individuals who were concerned of this issue to make sure that we had a comparable set of inputs helping us to drive towards what could be an optimal set of metrics for everyone to start to embrace and adopt into their reporting. So we published those metrics, as Meredith was saying, in September 2020, along with a call to action for companies to start voluntarily including this in their reporting, to really start demonstrating that companies wanted to signal that we can and we should move towards a globally aligned system for ESG reporting. Because of this effort we've taken on board together, we've really kind of, let's say, created this catalytic movement in the ecosystem, which Joe will cover off in a bit, but really to say that we've now become a convener to bring together so many different voices in this conversation to make sure that these dialogues, which were before taking place in silos between the standard setters, the regulators, the corporates, the academics, NGOs, we're really starting to bring it together on the forum platform. And because of that, have been helping to work on what could hopefully be the internationally aligned system that moves us forward and has that global alignment and global convergence. So I said that was our utopian dream, and we're still working towards that to see how we can equip what will be a new international body that will hopefully start to set the ESG reporting standards as we've done with financial accounting standards across the world. So we go to the next slide. And so really when we talk about our metrics, we really focus on these 21 core metrics. So as Meredith was saying, these are aligned to the 4 pillars of principles of governance, planet, people, and prosperity. All of these metrics here are signposted to existing metrics and standards. So we didn't create new metrics and standards. Rather, what we did is we said, these are the most used, these are the most feasible to report on, these are what are most important to stakeholders to see in reporting, and they're relatively industry agnostic. So can we actually start to create a global community of companies that are reporting on this? And many of the companies who are in our coalition are, taking on board this into the reporting, either as a first step into ESG reporting, or they already have many of these metrics included in their reporting, and they're earmarking and sharing through their reporting how they are already aligned to the metrics to further demonstrate the case that this is kind of these are the building blocks that can help bring together a globally aligned system for ESG reporting. We go to the next slide, please. And so, we gave that call to action in September 2020. We have over 170 companies who are working with us on this effort. It's been really exciting to see the breadth of the industries we have engaged in this work, of the geographies we have engaged in this work, and also the different stages that companies are on in their kind of awareness of this and in their reporting capabilities. So we have companies that have been doing ESG and sustainability reporting for over 20 years who are taking this on board and engaging with us in our project and our initiative. We also have companies who've never done ESG reporting before that are using this as an onboarding ramp to bring their organization up because they're hearing from their stakeholders that they need to enhance their reporting capabilities. And we also have a number of multinationals who have very extensive supply chains with thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises that are using the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics as a tool to actually start to bring their entire supply chain on board into the reporting journey. So companies that never reported because it was not material, they were not publicly traded, they were not obligated by their shareholders or their stakeholders, and this is really helping to bring them on board. And we already have 75 really great examples coming from these 170 companies showing how they've incorporated the metrics into their reporting. And it's really been helpful for us as being a catalytic kind of proof point to show the importance of this effort and how we can continuously engage stakeholders to move towards a globally aligned system for ESG reporting. And then to support all of this, we work very closely with the ESG executives at these 170 plus companies. So the folks in finance, sustainability, legal, HR, those who have a responsibility or remit to help with their organization's ESG reporting, and they're also their ESG strategy and delivery on that strategy. So really helping to facilitate a continuous peer exchange and learning and sharing of the different experiences and takeaways from peers as part of continued support to enhance reporting capabilities and awareness and knowledge share. So that's really what the forum is doing as part of this work, and we continue to grow this community. We continue to engage with this community of ESG practitioners, and we continue to lean on the exemplary work already done by so many members of our coalition to help inform us and the different stakeholders as we move forward in this journey and move towards this hopefully globally aligned system for ESG reporting. And now I think I'll hand it over to Mary to share some of the key learnings and key takeaways we've taken away as we've been on this effort together for the last couple of years.
Great. Thank you, Emily. It has been an amazing 3 years. It's hard to believe it's been that many. So I wanted to shift into, as Emily said, the learnings and what we've learned by adoption. And I think from the very beginning, I think what has distinguished this initiative is this essence of, progress, not perfection. And so it's a learn by doing. It's an iterative process for companies. I was at a speaking event yesterday, and one of our accountants said, with this ESG and sustainability initiatives, we're trying to fit like 90 years of accounting maturation, which we had for financial metrics, into like 90 days. So companies are feeling this pressure, as Emily said. And this has been something, as we start to adapt, we learn what needs to be done either internally in our own organizations or feedback we can give regulators on what works and what doesn't work. So I just wanted to start with what we've learned from that community of practitioners that Emily mentioned. As you saw, over 350 practitioners, a set of which we hold meetings twice a month on a range of issues, whether it's through adoption or the regulatory environment. And what we have found, and we've also looked at a lot of the reports that have come out in the mainstream reports to see and catalog what metrics people or companies are comfortable with, which ones are harder, so that we can give that feedback, not just individually, company by company, but as a collective group. What we can say to the regulator that 90% of the companies disclosing these already disclose scope 1 and 2 metrics, for instance, but scope 3 is more difficult, and we can do that based on data from those reporting the metrics. So overall, the benefits that we've seen that companies have reported as part of this community is this initiative really helped to get active CEO buy-in and support. Well, ESG standards and sustainability standards have been out there for some time. You didn't often hear a CEO talk about, for instance, their SASB, report. And getting the CEOs together and the CEO buy-in elevated this issue, and made a statement in the market that companies are on board. They are willing to disclose. They want to disclose their impact on stakeholders. They want to tell the story of their organization and how they are creating prosperity. But they did have, so many different demands, so many different frameworks. So it isn't that they're against transparency, but they wanted more. They wanted a simpler and more adoptable system. And so active CEO buy-in helps at the organizations too, in terms of the transformation that needs to happen internally to get this done. And I think it's distinctive from this initiative. It also allowed us to have a collective private sector voice, which I just discussed, so that when we are talking to the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board was just announced, or even in like the SEC, or even in the EU, there is a credible voice that the private sector can bring, either an individual company or as a collective, that we are out there trying to do this. This is what we're learning. And this is how we can contribute to getting the standards right. Was also initially, and again, this is about this moving in 90 days, getting ahead of regulation. What we've found, is that there are a lot of internal changes. And when EY did this, we interacted with at least 17 different groups across the organization. So finance, obviously, and talent, and D&I, and the sustainability team, and so it's all the way across, and getting all those functions to collaborate to bring these reports together. Even for us, we've instituted a new centralized impact reporting hub, so that we can do this on a regular basis and monitor that data. So adopting something like this for the community practitioners, what we have heard is that it allows that, and CEOs say it allows them to drive that internal change that needs to happen. And upfront investment to the reduced costs in the long term of ESG disclosure. And it also builds trust in your own process. And there's recent research out too from FCLT Global that shows that this whole idea of progress, not perfection, that if you start disclosing, if you make kind of aspirational statements around where you're going with this, and then hold yourself accountable and report against those statements, there is an increase in financial results over a period of around 3 years. And to just the opposite, there is a negative impact. So by saying they're going to do something and then don't report it, don't do it, there is a negative impact. So some of the challenges that we've heard are, again, when this came out, there was perception as it's just another framework. If there's 600 frameworks out there, why are there now 601? And this whole effort was none of these metrics were created by the Big Four. They're all existing standards that they're part of SASB, part of GRI, CDP. So it's a curation of what is out there. And so companies trying to get started, as Emily said, it was meant to be a baseline. If you're out and disclosing ESG data, carbon emissions is based on, planet metrics, and, D&I, is it, wage levels, and is it for people training levels? So it was an attempt to kind of not add 601, but perhaps bits of what was the best of the 600. In the US in particular, we got a lot of feedback on liability issues, and I think we're going to see a lot of that come out. Joe will talk about that with the SEC. And then, and I think, again, it's just once you put something out there, you have to, show that you you are actually doing it. And so we did get that it's less of an issue in Europe and in other markets, but it was something we heard in the US. And that the guidance, and this is, I think, could be a pro or a con. It's not prescriptive enough. So there are wide issue areas around, let's say, D&I metrics, or even the governance metrics, which are more qualitative around risk and opportunity assessments. How does that drive comparability if there's not enough guidance on exactly how you do it? I think that does come over time. There is guidance from the existing standards that these are based on, but that also allows the kind of flexibility we were seeing in the reporting itself. So companies, even with some of the metrics, not ready to fully disclose the entire, different elements of the metric, let's say community investment plus taxes paid, can do what they, what the data that's available now, and then, move toward more a more complete disclosure later. So, but again, I think that's something that will that the whole system is working on in this kind of 90 days. And then again, the data, I think that yesterday too, in a speaking event with over 100 accountants, the biggest problem they say is just gathering the data itself. And I think that Joe at Bank of America and others would agree that that's the initial, one of the initial issues. So you can so what we learned from at EY was, that we pulled this together to try to show our leadership team how we, what we learned and what we could do better. It helps us assess and monitor the changes in the landscape from the regulatory, investor, and stakeholder expectations. So these are constantly changing, and it helped us align what we are saying in terms of our own purpose and strategy. So at EY, we have building a better working world. We have a next wave strategy where we are creating long-term value for all of our stakeholders. It allows us to look at that, to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to that, and reporting against it in a consistent way over time as the stakeholder expectations change. So even like within the governance metrics, the materiality assessment, we're doing that again this year, interviewing all of our stakeholders as part of this disclosure of the SCM metrics to make sure we're aligning with, if we are saying we create value for stakeholders, who are they and what do they want? And is it reflected in our disclosures and how we hold ourselves accountable to that? Again, pressure tests our strategy. It's helped us to align and allocate capital. So even like on the training side, we're monitoring on the people metrics, how much we invest in training, and can compare ourselves against our competitors, compare ourselves against other professional services, and are we doing enough for our people? And then we can allocate more capital to that. In fact, we will have done that this year as a result of that process. Again, adapting technology and processes, digital, looking at different ways to collect data and to monitor that data, and put out dashboards with the idea that eventually, and I think there's a utopian regulatory outcome. There's also utopian, I think, corporate outcome in which any corporate leader is, when they read out their financial results, can read out the impact they're having on stakeholders in their non-financial metrics, and those things are treated as the same with equal importance in both internal reporting and monitoring and externally. And again, this is a dynamic system. It's obviously a very dynamic ecosystem right now, which so that idea that anything, we get some pushback from companies that say, why should I do this now when there's a global standard coming out, or why things will change? We keep saying, if you do it now, the process is just as important, and the dynamism in that process, because no matter what you do now, it is going to change. There is definitely, this is the way the system is moving. It's very fluid. And so getting those systems in place and adaptation and that clarity around how this fits into the overall strategy of a company now, and do it early, is how I think a real benefit of doing this. So if you can advance the slide. So I wanted to talk about it in relation to the commitments platform at the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. So from the very beginning, and we're obviously a member, and we have all of our commitments on the platform. Some are qualitative, some of the corporate responsibility work we do. But we have found that having the metrics aligned to these pillars, as Meredith already said, allows us to look as a community how we are performing against those, especially some of the qualitative metrics. We can monitor, that coalition companies over the last year have reduced their carbon emissions by X amount. If we are all doing that, all putting it on the website, all tracking what we're doing. And again, so we can see here, there's just some examples here of that wide range of how the pillars have been used to disclose. It could be qualitative commitments, certain programs, and then also qualitative data. So, principles of governance, Bell and Management Consulting's commitment on, how they're embedding ethical practices into their client practices, and ILAs, I think, is that how you pronounce it? ILAs, on planet and protecting and conserving biodiversity, maintaining ecosystems. This was actually an interesting story for EY, because doing this Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics, through our process, we were able to uncover, while only 8 of our offices are located in key biodiversity areas, that is 8, and it may be 8 of 175, but it instigated a new process around monitoring that, making sure that we were taking the right steps to protect those areas. So again, people, Movi's commitment to address gender equality in the technology center, a good target, a good quantitative metric, and then a prosperity commitment around promoting economic growth and increasing employment services in emerging markets. So the kind of best practice, the stakeholder capitalism metrics don't have targets. They are generally outputs. And I think for us as EY, what we've learned is some of those we have targets, but in order to manage progress and manage our own journey, actually having a target assigned, this has been a real focus for the coalition, and I think an important one, that it's time bound and measurable, that by a certain date you will have X number of, say, our partners, 40% of our partners will be women or something along those lines, and then be able to disclose according to that target. Great. So without further ado, I think if you advance the slide, I'm going to hand it over to Joe, because the company and the community is so important. How we are interacting with the ecosystem, I think, has been a new focus and an important one. So I'm going to pass it to Joe.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Emily. Definitely tough acts to follow. We'll do my best to be as articulate and cogent. And thank you to Meredith and the entire council team for giving us the opportunity, obviously, to talk about this work today, but also just all your efforts in promoting inclusive capitalism world over. I know it's an effort that our CEO, Brian Moynihan, has been proud to be a part of from the start, and really appreciate all the work you're doing. So as Emily and Mary both intimated, one of the great consequences, and perhaps one of the ultimate goals of our efforts, is that they're really helping to drive towards global convergence, simplification, and standardization of non-financial reporting. As they both intimated, one of the reasons we embarked on this process, our CEOs really wanted us to embark on this process, was to try to cut through the alphabet soup of the different metrics and ratings that companies have to contend with, and that stakeholders, whether it's investors or activists or whomever, find hard to compare. So in order to get the heart of what you need in those metrics, which Emily touched upon, to understand how to create sustainable value over time, you need to know what the priorities of all stakeholders are, to include society at large. And luckily, we do. The countries of the world identified those priorities in 2015, when nearly 200 nations agreed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, as most of you are probably aware, reflect 17 categories of social priorities, addressing equality of opportunity, affordable housing, prosperity, access to clean water, renewable energy, other priorities with specific goals to be met. And leaders in each country agreed to these goals as the ones we need to address to build a sustainable future and create opportunity and prosperity for all. Well, capitalism has a role to play in doing that. And common metrics that we've been discussing create a consistent way of measuring companies' long-term value across industry. And this in turn helps direct investment towards the high performer and align capital to those that are progressing the SDGs. We firmly, I think all of us, some of the research that Mary referenced, believe that businesses that measure sustainability impacts and integrate them into a corporate strategy, you're going to spot risks sooner and exploit opportunities earlier than competition. If the market discovers that someone in your supply chain is exploiting workers, your share price is going to plummet. You need to be in front of that. And on the positive side, research shows that companies that focus on ESG priorities are much less likely to fail than companies that do not. And then there's the research that Mary just referenced, which shows that those companies that actually adopt an ESG disclosure strategy and then follow through on it actually outperform those that just sort of talk the talk without walking the walk. So a globally consistent, comparable, reliable, and assurable corporate reporting system is indispensable to provide all stakeholders with a clear and comprehensive picture of an organization's ability to create sustainable value over time. So I think we can go to this slide right here, which shows how this is starting to happen. So the goal of the SCM was never necessarily to become the global reporting standard, but really to help catalyze convergence, which we really now have begun to see as our coalition builds. The fact, I think that Emily, and correct me if I'm wrong, our very first report was called Towards Common Metrics, which makes it very clear that this was a step upon the journey to get to the place, that utopian regulatory place that we all want with one sort of global or maybe two standards. As Mary intimated, we knew regulation in the non-financial reporting space was coming. And the more that companies could get ahead of it and work with investors and all stakeholders to curate the metrics that best served as proxies for the SDGs, the more influence we can have over the regulation as it's being promulgated. And you know what? The success of the adoption of the SCM in this incredible time frame that we've had, and the amount of uptake that we've had and the attention we got, has really helped ensure that regulation is now being done with us as opposed to just to us. I mean, to the extent that that's sort of ever possible, I think there's been real progress because we see that playing out. Mary referenced the ISSB, the International Sustainable Standards Board, which is an outgrowth of one of those financial reporting systems, the IFRS, that Emily mentioned. And so the forum and the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics Business Coalition strongly advocated for and supported the establishment of the ISSB as getting away towards global standards and harmonization. And so the ISSB, like I said, it was formed by the IFRS Foundation. And the idea was it would help meet the demand for high quality, transparent, reliable, and comparable reporting. And the intention is for the ISSB to deliver, and they have delivered drafts already, a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability related disclosures that provide investors and other capital market participants with information about how companies' sustainability related risks and opportunities will help them make informed decisions. So the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics team, the coalition, the CEOs, the company, the working groups had a lot to do not only with sort of getting the ISSB formation happened, but it even states, the IFRS states in their communication that the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics provide a useful starting point for companies to prepare for these changes. So as these regulations are being promulgated, they're looking at us as the building blocks. And as companies, large and small, start preparing for the regulation to come in, everyone agrees that these are very good standardized building blocks, which you can start thinking about now, which will prepare you for the regulation when it does come, as much as practicable. And we are definitely pleased that the World Economic Forum, led by Emily and everybody over there on her team, has worked closely with the IFRS Foundation on the technical readiness working group that really laid the foundation for the establishment of the ISSB. And the forum contributed its thinking on the stakeholder capitalism metrics and provided a business voice to support the development of the two prototype disclosure standards that were launched at COP26. You'll see a lot of the work that we have done embedded in there. And it shows not only that the ISSB, that process sort of listened to us because we were the voice of the issuer, because we were the voice of the company saying it was important, but because we had done homework over 2 to 3 years to find out what was important and to cull these things down, they sort of looked at it as this is the baseline we should start with, why recreate the wheel. So in addition to the work that's coming out of the ISSB, sort of the other big regulatory thing that's happening, there's a few. In 2022, we've already seen the release of the proposed SEC climate disclosure rules for the US. And those two, the draft is out now, and it's long and it's complicated and it's somewhat confusing, but that really was done in consultation with the IBC SEM companies. They were sought out and leveraged during the writing of the rule, and they continue to learn from our member companies, as Mary and Emily can attest. On a very regular basis, we have interactions with them as they look for feedback as they go through their own consultation and refinement process. So all this to say, this timeline to show, as you see the growth of the adoption of capitalism metrics, the companies that have signed up, and this is a little outdated now, the numbers are bigger, we're a little further to the right on this. As these rules are being promulgated that are going to sort of affect all our companies, the strength of that coalition has provided an outside influence in what those rules might look like. Now, they're not perfect, it's not direct, everybody's got sort of issues with whatever they might be, but the fact that we have this coalition built means that those rulemaking agencies are now coming to us to ask us how to work through those conflicts and help sort of correct them as best that they can. So we can go to the next slide, please. So you've kind of seen the timeline of the progress we've made and the integral role, I would say, and I don't think I'm overspeaking, that the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics have had in the development of the reporting ecosystem, because our effort really did, as Emily talked about in the beginning, bring together all stakeholders. And as Mary talked about, it has really given the private sector a seat at the table during the promulgation of regulation. So how else are we going to help enable the ecosystem, including the standard setters and companies prepare for the regulations? Well, you can see here, we're helping all continue to find common ground and cooperate towards that baseline set of international standards. And we've seen everybody really leveraging the work of the SCM project. And the background that we did and the rigor that we put into it is now being fed directly into that and appreciated by that. Also, as they mentioned around the community of practitioners, we're supporting companies to contribute their views and their practical experience of the metrics to the development of global disclosure and standards. This has occurred not only in the community of practitioners, like we said, but also through a variety of conversations and engagements with the ISSB, with the SEC, more and more with the EU, before, during, and after the writing of their draft rules. And I think most importantly, for those that sort of embrace what we're doing now with the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics, even if the final rule comes out might not be identical, everybody agrees that we're enabling companies to get ready for the upcoming regulations and amplifying their voice on the learnings that they're having, fostering the learning through all this community, and then hopefully continuing to prompt that global alignment on ESG reporting. So we can go to the last slide, and you can see that, where we are now. Huge progress made. 2020 is when we started, 2021 and into 2022 on the Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics and their impact on the larger reporting ecosystem. So we need to continue the momentum. Just because rules are coming doesn't mean we need to slow down and stop. In fact, we should accelerate, because as it shows, these rules are definitely, as they're being thought about and promulgated, the louder our voice is, the bigger our seat at the table, the more the company issuer voice will be represented. So I definitely encourage you to join the coalition of companies committed to reporting in the SEM. We'd love to have you on board, because like I said, the bigger the community, the louder the voice, the bigger the seat at the table. And obviously, whether you're ready to do that, whether you're thinking about it, or whether you have gotten started but want to learn more, engage with the community of practitioners to hear what the lessons learned are and practically go about this reporting. And then, use that voice as part of this. Encourage those of you who can respond to the current rule proposals that are coming out of the likes of the IBC, the SEC and the ISSB, because they really are taking our feedback into consideration. They know that their rules are not all the way there, and they want to hear what we're thinking to get back in. So I think the key bullet is the one at the bottom. Don't wait for regulatory action to happen to you. It's coming. Start with these stakeholder capital metrics, which so many companies have looked at, which so many regulators are looking at, and which you spend a lot of time curating, and everybody agrees is a great, not easy, but straightforward baseline in order to get your reporting started. So I definitely I encourage you guys to do that. And I think that the more the companies that join the SCM effort, the louder our voice, the more we can make sure that what comes forth is something that is satisfying to all stakeholders and not onerous to any single one. So thanks again, Meredith, for allowing us to sort of present here today.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, Joe and Mary and Emily. Oh, great. Okay, so for all of you, we will also be sending follow-up information so that you can reach Emily for more information on Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics. But here is how you reach her, as well as Melissa Victor, the Council's Programs Manager, who works with all members on resource provision and learning support. So you can find out more about SCM or how to get involved.